Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Today we're going to be talking about something very interesting, something potentially quite new to some people, in the form of the anatomy of a high-profile incident. Now, if you've been in InfoSec for any length of time, you will have experienced some form of incident. Sometimes it's a piece of malware that's come in and maybe a phishing email or problem that occurs that you will need to go in and resolve. This happens time and time again, plenty of times in your average day-to-day working environment for any InfoSec professional. But what we're going to talk about today is a high-profile incident. We are talking the serious ones, the ones that come once in a blue moon. When they hit you like a freight train. They cause massive problems. There's people in your own company who potentially are panicking, frightened, worried about whether or not the business is going to survive it. You're obviously worrying because you've got to at least try to resolve the situation or put a Band-Aid over it. And you're probably getting fired at from all different angles all around the business, asking for updates. What's going on? How do you fix it? Have you fixed it yet? And so on and so forth. It can get extremely stressful. Now, today, I am really lucky to have two fantastic gentlemen from Mishcon, Paul Hemmings and Joe Hancock. Guys, pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
Fantastic. Do you kind of want to just introduce yourselves one at a time and a little bit about yourselves, a little bit about your background, what you do, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So I'd say I'm Joe Hancock. I'm a partner here at Mishcon. I have to say this, I'm not a lawyer. I just work for a law firm. I lead the cybersecurity practice here, where we focus on helping clients who, as we've mentioned already, have some of those high-profile incidents. So I've been in cyber for too long, started when it was information security. No one was interested. No one wanted to talk to me about it. People still don't want to talk to me, but everyone's heard of cybersecurity now. So at least something's changed. But yeah, that's what we do on a not a day-to-day basis, a week-by-week basis, helping our clients that they've had those kind of high-profile problems.
Fantastic.
Paul Hemmings. I'm the commercial director within our cyber practice here in Mishcon. I work for Joe. Similar background to Joe, sort of starting, I guess, back in defense security side of things. And yeah, the last 20, 25 years into what is now called cyber. Secure comms originally, now cyber.
It's funny how things have changed, isn't it? You know, it used to be called IT security, then it was called information security. Now it's kind of gone back to cybersecurity, although many of us say cybersecurity is just an extension of information security, but sometimes people look a bit cross-eyed when you say information security these days. So yeah, it's funny how things turn around. But no, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. So high level, high profile, big incidents, the ones that you really fear hitting you. This is the type of kind of situation where normally you guys are brought in. I take it the average client, assuming they haven't got some kind of retainer with you, will give you a very panicked phone call. They're in the middle of something smelly hitting the fan. There's things going off all over the place. What's the situation then? So what do you find yourselves in quite commonly when this happens? When you have that panicked, I don't know, InfoSec person, business owner, IT lead, whoever it may well be.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first thing is kind of when these things happen. You always have this idea that you're going to get the call at 2:00 in the morning and it's going to drag you out of bed and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, bitter experience has told me that the two times these things happen are 4:30 on a Friday or whenever I put my out of office on. Yeah. Unfortunately, and I think there's something in that insofar as that often by the time an incident has become big enough, the fire's got out of control, you are heading towards the end of the day. This is not something that, people don't see the first whiff of smoke, let's call it that, if we can stretch that analogy, and then call you straight away. Things develop so often we're getting called at the end of the day. But also, like, we see, especially holiday periods, that's often when people have got, there's people still in around the office, people around the business, they've got a bit less to do, perhaps, or they're in their kind of day job. And so, they start looking, hang on, that light has been blinking on that thing for quite a while now. Maybe I should go and look at it. And so, we've had incidents that have been notified to us, 23rd of December, I have ruined several Christmases. My wife won't let me forget it. But because that's just when stuff kind of occurs. And you're right, those calls are sometimes panicked, they're sometimes emotional, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people, are quite calm about these things. Maybe they're like the duck frantically paddling and serene on top and not so much under the water. But the thing that's common to all of them is you're always dealing with a level of ambiguity. It's never entirely clear what necessarily has happened and also what is going to happen. Our responders always have to be very comfortable effectively dealing with the unknown. You can't come up with a solid plan that you're going to be able to follow step by step through things. Ultimately, it's always an investigation. You're always working through things, unpicking things, trying to get to the best idea you can of what's occurred, and also, frankly, getting together as much of a plan as you can to put things right again, for whatever definition of right is. But yeah, those, I think to a certain degree, those calls probably don't get any easier.
I bet they don't. I mean, and this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, on the lower end incidents, you can create things like playbooks and what have you. They tend to happen in a very similar fashion. The response tends to be very similar as well. I mean, whenever I create playbooks, and we do that quite a bit for our customers, I try to leave them as adaptable as possible. But more often than not, you can kind of roughly predict what you'll need to do and when you need to do it. But that's really not true when it comes to the really nasty events, one of those kind of company-shattering events like full-blown ransomware, possible massive fraud or IP theft, which, can feasibly completely destroy an organization or its reputation or anything. I mean, this is where it's not enough just to have an InfoSec person there to try to fix it. I'm guessing a lot of the time you've had a situation where the information security professional or team, maybe some other members, they've tried to fix something, but they've reached a point where they've realized that it's actually getting way too critical for them to be able to deal with. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And, I always look at what we do as effectively crisis management for cyber incidents, because by the time it gets to this level, it's no longer an event anymore. It's a crisis. And if this is going to, it has those size impacts, and sometimes that is potential impact. The impact hasn't happened yet, but you can see it coming. You can see that there's going to be regulatory action. You're potentially going to get fined. You can see you're going to get sued. You can see that your users and customers, data subjects aren't going to be very happy, or frankly, you can just see the size of the problem getting your business back up and running again. But to me, you're facing a crisis at that point. And again, most incident response plans, great at the incident bit. And again, most crisis plans for organizations tend to be business continuity plans. And so often we tend to find we're in this bit of a gap where, our more mature clients who've got good crisis management capability, I'd say, are not the ones then having major incidents. The Venn diagram of people who have incidents and level of maturity, big incident level of maturity is quite far apart. But yeah, we treat these things as a crisis, and therefore, you're looking at a broader set of skills. There's always been, I think, within the kind of the cybersecurity domain, let's call it that for today, a real focus on the response to an incident is to do lots of forensics, to do lots of investigation, to find out what happened. Let's work out how the attacker, and there's always an attacker in the kind of traditional sense of word, got in and did this thing, whereas actually a lot of the time what we're dealing with is a situation where the business response is different. The business is worried about PR and comms. It's worried about legal liability. It's worried about its regulatory obligations. It needs to know what happened, but to a certain degree, it's not really worried about whether or not you've got a forensic image of every machine that's involved.
Yeah.
And these kind of things. And so often I find that when we're dealing with incidents, when we're dealing with your classic kind of information security orthodoxy that doesn't actually help with a business response to a business incident, which is what a crisis like this is.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, one of the things we've learned as a team is the skill set is very broad that's needed. And as Joe said, coming into an incident, it could be anything, quite honestly, and it develops and morphs at quite a rate. The clever thing is having that skill set together so that, again, that speed of response is fast. And that pool of knowledge is essential to be able to establish a strategy and a plan very early on, to be able to then give the clients options. And that just comes from experience and knowledge. But we probably have 11, 12 different individual functions, for want of a better word, being able to reach and pull those together very quickly. As Joe says, within that crisis, being able to bring them in, play to their strengths, and indeed to be able to not handhold, but calm the client and explain the next 72 hours, most likely, from our experience, are going to look like this. And these are the options, and this is why. I mean, you've got some wonderful war stories about those environments.
Yeah, the emotional side of things is always, I mean, you are in a bit of a pressure cooker, right? It's we've had incidents where senior members of the team have just disappeared for 3 days because they've already been living and breathing this for 2 weeks beforehand, and they get kind of over the edge. Completely rightly, there's a human cost to incidents, which people often forget about. But I mean, a crisis, not just an incident. One of the things I always kind of ask when we first get involved is like, when was the last time that anyone ate or slept? Because both of those things start feeling like a luxury when you're really firefighting. They want to pitch in something, but after about kind of 72 hours, they become really important. I always kind of joke with the team when we're dealing with a real crisis. If somebody hasn't shouted at me within the first 72 hours, are we really dealing with a crisis? Because that, I say to my clients, look, emotions are running high. You're going to hear things you don't want to hear. We're not going to always be able to tell you everything is all right and going to be fine. We're going to say we don't know. And that, all the emotions going on. People are always coming from a good place with it. No one's doing this maliciously, right? People that have the emotion because they care, and they're worried and those kind of things. But I'd say sometimes crisis management then is kind of 50% incident response and 50% being kind of a therapist and putting your arm around someone and saying, this is going to be all right, here's what we're going to do, and helping guide them through it so they can go back to the day job that they want to be doing.
Absolutely. I mean, being in information security anyway, quite often you're having to deliver, news that people don't necessarily always want to hear. And you kind of get used to that. But when you're kind of dealing with a situation where you're communicating to a business owner or the stakeholders or the C-suite that potentially the incident they're experiencing is going to have some very large detrimental effects on their business, it's a bitter pill to swallow. And it's very different. I mean, when it's a smaller end event, they'll potentially throw some money at it. They'll kind of, deal with having to fix it over a period of time and, or maybe buying in a product or whatever it may well be to kind of resolve that situation and then take steps to hope that it never happens again. But on these higher end incidents, you don't have that luxury. And it was really interesting what you said, Paul, when you said about, the different sort of like people that you need to bring in. When I teach incident response, I teach that about high-level incidents. And a lot of people kind of look at me and kind of go, why do we need a PR person? Why do we need a legal person or a financial person? Why do we need to bother the CEO? And I've said, look, in high-level incidents, comms is going to be one of the main things, not only to, internally, but also potentially externally as well. And you better get ready for that. And the InfoSec person or the team or the IT team shouldn't and can't do that. That's down to somebody who knows how to deliver that kind of information. And of course, you're involving the C-suite on these high-end, profile issues because A, they need to know about really what has happened. but B, they need to prepare themselves and potentially put their weight behind, the resolution and getting things back to potentially a working state. And I think a lot of organizations just think InfoSec will deal with it. Oh, if we have an incident, like ransomware, InfoSec and IT will deal with it. No, that's not the case. It actually goes well beyond that. And it's good to know that I'm teaching people the right way to do incidents.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah.
But I'm very glad to hand all the high end incidents over to you guys, and that is for all of you out there what we do when it comes to high end incidents. Mishcon they've got the lawyers, they've got the people who do that kind of thing. We'll help out. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes you just need to bring in the big boys, and this is where these guys come in. So kind of, let's say an incident has kicked off. You've had the call, you've had the initial thing. It looks like, let's just say some IP has been stolen. Maybe it's a car manufacturing firm. Oh, actually, no. Let's say it's a military contractor, and they believe that the latest plan for, say, a new type of radar or a new type of aeroplane has potentially been stolen. Be it could be state, it could be actual hackers, it could just be whatever. Is there kind of like a defined process you follow once you've kind of gotten through the door and obviously picked up your first coffee and asked whether or not people have eaten and slept? What's your kind of standard process? What would you recommend people obviously do other than obviously calling you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we have kind of standard playbooks and approaches for different incident types. I mean, so while we do differentiate per sector normally in terms of people's notification obligations effectively, and so in defence, we know that if you're going to have to tell certain organisations, certain agencies, you're going to be able to lean on a certain amount of support, and your supply chain contracts are also going to have certain requirements in them, which you wouldn't find if you were in different in the healthcare sector. Again, where different obligations, totally different again if you're in regulated financial services, or if you're just running a retail store. There's different obligations, but ultimately, often from the technical side of things, the attacks are pretty similar. So we have for example, if we're looking at a single host compromise or a network compromise, have a specific playbook for those things, and we follow the standard kind of NIST model. To analyse, contain, eradicate, and recover effectively, and we stage all of our playbooks around that. But what's very interesting in these kind of different scenarios is often one of the things we want to understand is actually what is the impact we're worried about? What are we actually trying to get back to? Because that will steer to a certain degree what options we have and don't have. I mean, the defence example is an interesting one because there is probably going to be more intelligence value and more questions from your potential clients around what happened and who did it.
A lot of big people in suits are going to come down and knock on your door.
Yeah, and to a certain degree, that might be to your favour, right? Because it might actually be that the incident gets taken over and handled, and it's that's no bad thing, right, from a cost perspective. And the reason for that is though that from if you're a publicly listed company, obviously comms and PR are very important because it's going direct to share price. But if you're not there, the thing you really need to worry about is those customers, because the defence sector is always an interesting one where it's not like somebody will go and buy a competitor's product, and it's not like someone's going to go and take that IP and build their own. The person who would do it is someone who wasn't going to buy from you in the first place, right? It's an adversary rather than a friend, so to speak. And you've only got to look at the comparisons of some countries' aircraft, for example, to see that some of those probably came from espionage of a cyber variety. But in those kind of spaces, again, to me, it's always about following as defined a process to deal with the type of incident that you're kind of facing. And the reason for that is not because the process is perfect, but it's there as an aid memoir. It's there to make sure that in the heat of the moment, everyone remembers the things they're supposed to be doing, and you can learn the lessons from each kind of incident. So to a certain degree, our process is sector agnostic. The bit which is specific is often around kind of how the business model works and who you have to talk to and those kind of things. And ultimately, some of the actions that we might then take in mitigation of those things. So, if someone is it's a PII breach and you're FCA regulated, if it's big enough, you're going to have to tell the regulator. And you have a positive obligation to do that, and you need to do it in the right way, and you need to work with them. And there are steps that you can take then forward to make sure that consumers are protected and there's no impact on operational systems. And that regulator will care about those things and ask you those questions. So in that sector, that's what you need to be focused on, because that is ultimately one of your biggest kind of risks. Again, just wouldn't apply in retail, if you see what I mean, if you were in a non-regulated industry.
There's a lot that can come out from threat intelligence as well, isn't there? Again, we've got a threat intelligence team which figure quite prominently in many of those playbooks very early on in the incident. There's a lot of information that can help inform those next steps, which can be incredibly useful, incredibly helpful with looking at options.
We always believe that you want to be intelligence-led, because again, it's that, to a certain degree, if you're looking for the needle in a haystack, it's good to have a really good idea of what needles look like. If you see what I mean, to kind of really stretch the analogy. We always use that team. I mean, a classic example is you get an extortion demand. Is it real or not? That is, to me, that's a threat intelligence problem. It's, do I recognise any of the kind of information that's in there? Do I recognise a group name? Is that, a group that is an affiliate based or kind of one solid group? Have we seen other notes that look like this? Are the cryptocurrency addresses in there real? Have they ever been seen before? And you do an intelligence assessment, and that then drives your kind of response. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of extortion notes that have been so amateur they've demanded cryptocurrency payment and not included an ability to pay them, and an address. I have seen it where they have DDoSed a client and then sent them an email to systems that are now unresponsive to try and pay a ransom. And only 3 days later, once we dealt with the denial of service, did we find the ransom demand. So, you look at those things and you see there's a certain MO to it, and you kind of know what you're dealing with. But the flip side of it is you also see
these are unorganised criminals.
Yeah. And then you see the other end of it. Paul's talking to there, as I always, in my brain, I always put things into organised and disorganised criminals, and I always prefer to deal with the organised ones because they're organised, and frankly, it's just easier. There's rules, and they're not very emotional about it, and you can actually have a conversation with them. The disorganised ones, it's all emotion. They've seen too many movies, crazy demands. When you say no to them and take it really personally, they do silly things. It doesn't help anybody. On the organised, this is to defend neither camp, but on the organised side, at least you can get to a resolution. But again, that's an intelligence assessment. What kind of crook am I dealing with when we're dealing with cyber criminals? We've had results where we've done negotiation, we've helped get to the right place. And the group said, "Thank you for making this such a smooth process. We'll give you 2 weeks of tech support on this email address." It's a weird world out there dealing with cybercrime, including when you're then depending on whether you're dealing with organised or disorganised criminals, is whether you will see fiat payments or cryptocurrency payments. How you trace those? How do you work through any potential money laundering issues? And again, that intelligence assessment right at the start is what then sets and defines the kind of playbook and tactics we'll use to go after the bad guys, so to speak.
I did have a good laugh, actually. I chucked it up on LinkedIn about one group who actually say, just quietly tell us what your policy is for cyber insurance, and we'll charge it to that. So we just want the money, take it from the insurance people. We're not interested in you. But it's quite frightening how they become more and more organised, and they become less fragmented. And now there's a lot of interconnects. There's access brokers who are well known and vetted by teams who then sell that to the relevant team. And sometimes that team will put it off to an affiliate if they think it's better being run by an affiliate. They also tend to get really annoyed when an affiliate, if their policy is not to attack children's hospitals, good example I saw recently. Mm-hmm. And they get really annoyed if their affiliate attacks a children's hospital, and they'll actually kind of get on the on the comms and say,
protecting their brand, aren't they?
Well, this is it. I mean, ultimately, as I say to a lot of people who question me, because you do get it a lot from people who aren't in cybersecurity, why do they do it? Why are they doing this? And it's like, well, they're doing it for the money. That's all they care about.
The business model.
I mean, there are fundamentalists out there. There are people who go and do stuff to just cause you pain. But the really organised ones, the ones where you see the really big incidents, they're in it for the money. They're all in it for gain, and that is literally it. However, there is another type of high-end incident which is quite interesting. What happens if it's a malicious insider and they're still there? Have you come across that? And how does that work? Because I'm guessing they're trying to prevent you in many ways. Kind of, obviously, they don't want you finding out what they've gone and done. So they're trying to cover their tracks. But they're still there, and potentially they could be on that C-suite, watching what you're doing. Run me through sort of like what you do then. I mean, is it a case of you try to figure out very early on whether or not it was an insider, and if it is, whether or not it's one of the people you're communicating with, just to be wary? Or do you wait till the end and do a big reveal like in, Columbo, for instance? How does that work?
I only wish it was so televisual. That'd be great. You tend to have in 80% of the cases, straight away based on what's happened. The kind of the incidents, whatever's brought the incident to light tends to point you one way or another. So, if there has been an internal fraud and the accounts don't line up anymore and some money's missing, you tend to know who it is, in inverted commas. At least you've got a suspect pool. You've got an insider problem because, it's the more likely explanation. But there are some cases where you come into something and it's what I would now call a gut feel, but you can just feel that this might have the hallmarks of an insider. And sometimes we deal with people with administrative and privileged access in the IT team who are the ones who are on the wrong side of this.
I was speaking to some intelligence companies on a podcast a little while back, not that long ago, and they were talking about how the malicious side, the malicious actors were some of them were changing their tactics, and they were giving a percentage of whatever they got ultimately out of the breach to the individual who gave them access, and they're actively trying to find people inside an organisation. Maybe somebody disgruntled, they didn't get their bonus, they didn't get a pay rise, they didn't. Maybe they're just desperate. There's a lot of desperate people out there. And it is getting to the point where I think one of the guys was saying that they're finding occasionally when somebody has compromised someone's home network as part of that, obviously to try to get in, they found that the partner is, playing away from home where they shouldn't be playing away, and then feasibly use them to introduce malicious stuff into the work environment of the person working from home. And there's a lot of very insidious kind of methods now that these groups are starting to look at using. Is that correct? I mean, is that what you're seeing as well?
I mean, we see a lot of intelligence reporting around it, and some of that comes from, groups advertising for people who've got access. Whether it's real, whether those people actually ever get paid, I haven't seen we haven't seen an incident yet where someone has been paid by an external actor to carry out a cyber attack. We've seen plenty of incidents where there are insiders and outsiders involved, and sometimes you get coercion, sometimes you get just kind of family relationships, people are associates. I'm going to commit this fraud and rip my employer off for this amount, and I need a bank account for it to go into, and you're my family member, so I'll use yours, and you get that kind of stuff. I mean,
business partners that fall out.
Business partners that fall out, yeah. You get, there's a whole range. I mean, I said disgruntled IT administrators dealt with a few times now. Again, tends to be in smaller businesses where they are the only person with the access, but. You don't tend to see it in large organisations, and also you do just get, you get the full spectrum of kind of human behaviour in this stuff. But in tougher economic times, economic crime does go up. There's no doubt. And, people, there are opportunities presented to people that they wouldn't take if they were in slightly different circumstances, and sometimes they do. And I think it's interesting, as an industry, I think we're now becoming more accepting around that insider risk exists and we should do something about it. I think kind of even 10 years ago, it was kind of frowned upon to talk about that, because it might indicate you didn't trust everybody in your organisation all of the time, and that really we don't want to do. Whereas now, kind of managed distrust, I see as kind of appearing more and more, and that's I'm confident that everyone who works for our organisation is a good person and I can trust them. But I also want to make sure we have financial controls in place, data control, so I can prove that to somebody. And so I think it's becoming much more accepted to deal with that in that way. But yeah, we do deal with those kind of sometimes malicious, sometimes accidental insider type problems. I mean, one example I always come back to is, what do you do with the person who works for the organisation if they generate constant security issues? So, this is the 4th time you've been phished this year, and this has cost us X amount, and we've had to report to the regulator twice. What do you do about that? The classic cyber answer has been awareness training, which I'm pretty sure they had, and they clicked next 150 times, and now they're aware. And kind of, but they've still got a problem. And often, is that a systems issue? Are we asking someone to do something and putting them in a situation where, if their job is to click on links and they get 1,500 emails a day, well, it's not their fault. Is it something we need to deal with as a performance issue? So there's a whole bunch of kind of more organisational type issues I see around this kind of insider problem we're just starting to deal with now as well. It's a slight aside to your question.
And the social engineering side, again, is becoming ever more sophisticated, to deal with what Joe's described. Again, it's fair to say the attackers are increasingly upping their game in that space.
They're all using Grammarly and ChatGPT to write better phishing emails.
Yeah, targeting individuals, using social media, really getting to understand the victim, who they're going to approach. And to your point, James, bribery, coercion, again, that's typically one of the tools they use in getting to understand what'll make that individual, undertake something perhaps typically they wouldn't. It's a complex space, certainly.
It's interesting, are you seeing more and more attacks? I mean, you read the media at the moment and everything, there's something new. There's actually 2 or 3 things that are new pretty much every other day or every day. We've had a whole raft of very, very high profile breaches that have caused some massive economic problems, and obviously with it was Merck, wasn't it, that won the £1.4 billion payout, which has now meant that insurance companies can't feasibly use the whole "it was an act of war" because we could associate the malicious actors with a nation state, or we suspect they're a nation state, so it's an act of war. Are you starting to see kind of attacks speed up and the incidents occurring on a much more regular basis on bigger and bigger clients, or is it still pretty standard as you've always experienced?
I think it doesn't make good headlines, but it's always been the same. There's always been a background level of incident, if you see what I mean. And sometimes, again, as a sector, we get very distracted by, it's an advanced this and it's a nation state that, and it's all very, statistically, in my view, you're likely to be a victim of cybercrime, and frankly, you're likely to be a victim of not very good cybercrime. Invoice redirection fraud from account takeover or business email compromise works. It's why the crooks do it. They make good money out of it.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of victims, especially in the SME space, that they can keep kind of churning through. And we see the background level of those attacks, I'd say, is pretty much the same as it was even a couple of years ago. During COVID, we saw some changes. I mean, we saw changing kind of TTPs, but more around when parts of the world had lockdowns, you'd see less attacks from those parts of the world. And then also because the attackers, basically, every phishing lure became about COVID. but because no one's reading emails about anything else, right? So that changed, but the world's kind of gone back to normal again. I mean, we do see, I kind of call it like tinkering around the edges, if you see what I mean. MFA stopped a bunch of account takeovers. It's now becoming pretty easy to fish your way around MFA, and so but the kind of the incident in the background still happens. It's just that the sort of stuff in front of it changes. I think the kind of the high profile incidents, the thing that has changed is people are now more accepting that this stuff happens. I think we've got a bit of breach fatigue. Even if you think about kind of like, the Travelix ransomware, for example, which was headline news, I think because of when it happened, not to say where it happened, who it was. But there wasn't that kind of like, you don't get the victim blaming you used to get where it was seen as people's fault and they should have been doing something different. And also people, I think, worry about it a bit less. I mean, I suspect all three of us have had multiple emails saying that our data's been lost somewhere potentially. And to a certain degree, you just kind of like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It doesn't change anything. So I think the drumbeat is still the same. Don't know, it will change. I mean, we did some research a couple of years ago where we looked at kind of, from different scenarios, the future of cybercrime and what would actually make cybercrime stop. And while you have...
No, you're never going to stop it.
Well, yeah, but when you've got parts of the world... I totally agree with that, by the way. But when you've got parts of the world that have got less economic opportunities, populations of a high level of technical skill and education, and there's poor security practices more broadly that represent an opportunity to make money, people are going to commit crime in general, right? It comes down to an opportunity piece. If it is a way for you to make more money using your skill set than doing something else in a legitimate way, from one perspective, you can see perhaps how people end up where they do. Yeah. And again, when we have lax enforcement, I mean, you look at, law enforcement is just not capable of dealing with cybercrime in volume because, all the reasons with the smaller law enforcement agencies, these kind of things. You're right. That's why I think we will never stop it. But all of that means that there's this constant drumbeat of these kind of issues.
I mean, do you think it's becoming a lot more organised, though? If the rate of incidents and issues is the same, do you have any concerns about seemingly how? Because it used to be a bit of a Wild West. It would be groups of individuals going out, trying their hand and all the rest of it. But now it seems to be a little bit more like how the Yakuza was run. It's run as a company. It's run with a person in charge and, almost like cells of individuals underneath. I mean, does that give you pause? Because I must admit, the amounts of money that you're seeing them being paid out, and they are being paid out quite often, it's just going to attract more and more kind of individuals into that space, as you say, especially from economic countries with an issue with economics and all the rest of it, or even people who are desperate. People who've lost their jobs, who've got skills in this space, and they've got to feed the kids. I mean, who wouldn't? Let's be honest. If you got desperate, you turn to the dark side. You've got to if you've got to feed your kids, you've got to feed your kids. But it does seem to be getting so much more organised. Gone are the days where people go into a bank, bust in, do the vault, grab the stuff, get out, and go. It's far easier to do, a cyber-based attack, compromise, and you can even buy in as a service functions now, which is even more hilarious. They're kind of mimic, and they're so well funded as well.
I think it's worth remembering, criminals are lazy.
Yeah.
And, that path of least resistance, if there's an easy way of doing it, they'll do it. And they'll, you don't
have to be sophisticated for stuff to work. You really don't, right? I mean, you really, that is the, and it's interesting to use the analogy of the bank robbery. Okay, you don't see banks getting turned over anymore because that there is a whole bunch of security process in place, and also we've frankly digitized and removed the big bank vault, right? Which is actually
Plus, they don't have any money especially if you're with SVP.
True, yeah. That means an argument the banks become the bank robbers, right? But that's kind of now we're getting controversial. No, I'm
to your
joking,
point, James, the fact that a lot of that malicious code, is very easily accessible. It's cheap as well. Literally for a few £100, there's things that can be bought very readily. So disgruntled employees and indeed people that are just out to make a fast buck, that is too easy to do these days. And the easier it gets, the more it becomes a temptation, as you described. I think that is a problem. That is a problem.
And I think what's even more hilarious is they've got really, really good tech support as well. And whether you're the poor sod that's been breached, or whether you're the person who's engaging their service to do the breach, I've heard their tech support is better than most organisations who you'd utilise for IT support these days, who are legitimate.
Probably fair, but you've got to remember they haven't got change control to go through. They've got no shareholders, and they probably don't have to put a business case together for investment. Maybe they do, but I suspect that there's a flatter organisation, shall we say.
I mean, just obviously we're into the last legs now. It's just out of interest for I hear a lot from people. What do these people like to talk to? And when you are in a situation where you're in comms with one of the malicious actors who's they want their money, maybe they want their ransom, maybe they want their money for the decryptor or whatever it may well be. We don't care really what the incident is. What do they like to deal with? I mean, obviously, as you've mentioned before, you've got the ones who are really kind of unprofessional, but the ones who are less experienced. But what are the really experienced, the ones that really give you pause? What do they like to deal with?
In my experience, they've always been. I mean, look, you build a relationship. It's not a one. And so where it starts and where it ends is sometimes two different places. And also, as you go along the process, you want to build commitment on both sides, and you want to, it depends why you're communicating, right? So, for example, we have negotiated to help gain information. We want to know how something happens. We want to know what someone's intentions are. Maybe someone, we've had contacts where someone said, I'm a security researcher and I would like you to pay me a bug bounty for this thing that I've found. And then you're trying to work out, well, is this somebody who is, maybe just trying their luck, or is this actually a blackmail attempt? Or it is. And depending who they are and what the motives are, you then have to have that conversation. And, sometimes those conversations are robust, Sometimes those conversations are a bit more easy, a bit more free-flowing. But the thing I'd say overall is that the more organised the people you're dealing with and the more professional, the easier this stuff is, because, you quite quickly get into an interaction that is, if they say, and we will message you back in 48 hours, they will probably do it. And if they say they're going to do something, then they'll do it. Because it to Paul's point, it goes to their brand, right? If they say they'll do something, and they follow through on their commitments, they want to market to people like us, right? Whereas you get, and they're also, they want to get to an end goal, but that they've probably got 4 or 5 other opportunities on the go at the same time. Whereas again, when you're dealing with the slightly more, let's call them amateurs, disorganised, single person who's going to, just maybe doing the security researcher type thing, again, it's a bit more emotional for them. The amounts might be small they're asking for, but actually that matters more to them. And those conversations, again, I must admit, everyone has tended to be pretty pleasant. Sometimes, people get a bit emotional, especially when they often to the point where, we always say this to clients, look, if you're going to say you've been extorted for ransom, there is a point the person on the other end of the phone will work out they're not going to get paid. And if that's what's not going to happen, then that's the point where there's going to be a reaction, and they'll either just, they're either nothing's going to happen, they're going to do what they said they do, or there's going to be a bit of kind of.
Well, ultimately, they just want to get paid, don't they? So, I mean, on their side of the fence, they're sitting there thinking, actually, if I don't take this, I'm not going to get paid. So why don't I just take this? I'll just take what.
Or sometimes, that they think they're going to get paid, they get emotionally invested in it, and then you have to let them down, as gently as you can, so they don't do anything silly. You don't want to create a slightly more adverse risk, but at the same time, again, I come back to this point of most of my interactions with trucks in that regard have been relatively pleasant, and that's been no different actually in the physical world than it has been in kind of cyber. When you deal with more, I can't believe I said high-end criminals, you tend to find everyone's actually, we're not the target. There's no benefit to them in not being at least polite and pleasant with you. But at the same time, there are kind of not rules to it, but everyone kind of knows that we're here doing this, we're going to say that. I don't really believe what you're telling me, and vice versa. How can we build a trust in an untrusting environment in the middle of it? Yeah, but they're always interesting.
Just very quickly, do they ever recognise you? Do you ever come across the same guy again and go, all right, how's it going? Oh, yeah.
There is one UK-based organised crime group that we have dealt with, I would say 3 times. And the reason I know it's the same people is because I recognise the voice on the phone. And that is where they were carrying out an investment type fraud aimed at members of the public. And we provided some mobile phone numbers they could call because we wanted to try and work out what was going on. And over a period of time, we recognised the same person. And that is because they have got a system, a scam of a thing that works, and that's what they do. You sometimes do find that. Other times you've got no idea, right? You're messaging someone.
Do they ever recognise you, though?
I hope that somewhere someone isn't sat there being like, every time I ring that number, I get him.
It's him again.
It's him. Yeah. He's awful. He's so rude.
Do you ever fear that, because of what you do, and sometimes, you could end up being the target from some of these groups yourself because they just get a bit annoyed, or, they've had a bad interaction, or they've not got what they want and gone, right, that's it, I'm going for this?
No, not really. We do sometimes see angst against kind of like the, anti-malware companies and researchers who have caused them pain. We're there to try and help manage the incident. Ultimately, we're there to kind of look, right, we want to bring these people to justice. We absolutely do. But at the same time, they're going to be more angry probably at law enforcement than us. We are one in 1,000 people that do this. So I'd worry more about if we were involved in this was the Italian mafia and we were dealing with a negotiation, that I'd be more worried about them turning up at home. Whereas no, I don't worry about it from that perspective. Frankly, if I did, I wouldn't do it. It wouldn't be worth my family's kind of safety. Of course. But no, we always, we've talked a lot about negotiation, but the incidents that end in negotiation are rare. It's not every day. Most of the time, when you're investigating or you're doing instant response, you don't have an adversary on the other side of it. And also, to a certain degree, what's really in it for them? To put themselves in harm's way by coming to the UK in the first place, because, again, the part of the reason that people go into cybercrime is because it is the risk of being caught over international borders.
Oh, I meant them attacking you digitally, not coming down your house and...
Yeah, no. You see, yeah, so from a digital perspective, absolutely, right? And to a certain degree, I kind of view it the same as the physical attack. What would they gain by it? They get to see lots of photos of my dog and kids. But welcome to those. and they're lovely dogs.
Brilliant. Right, well, we've reached the top end of the hour or so. Kind of final thoughts on this, really. I think one of the things that I train a lot, we do a lot with our customers, is kind of like the high-end, what we call the high-end wargaming, where we don't do the malicious attack on just one machine or whatever, but we actually wargame through a serious event, like the death of somebody who's a single point of failure, or, different situations where parts of the company are compromised and stuff. Do you see value in organisations undertaking a regular kind of disaster recovery kind of scenario where, major incidents form, as part of that kind of profile, just so they could figure out, what's the team that we need? Who do we need? If it was that bad an incident, who do we need to involve? Because I see a lot of people doing the lower end stuff where they're reliant on the InfoSec team to provide pretty much all of the guidance. But as you guys said kind of towards the beginning, high-end incidents require so many more people involved, or so many different types of disciplines involved, be it legal, be it financial, be it the CEO, or head of marketing, head of finance, whatever it may well be. Do you think there's value in doing that high-end wargaming where you involve those individuals? And would you recommend that to organisations who genuinely want to be prepared for a high-profile incident, other than obviously having you guys on retainer? As a quick plug for you guys.
No, thank you, Jay. No, absolutely right. I mean, I always say that every kind of pound, minute, whatever item of value you want to go for, you kind of spend in advance of an incident, I think pays off exponentially when you have.
Absolutely.
Be that spending, you spend half an hour having a cup of tea in the team, chatting over what would we do if, and it gives you some more questions to go away and think about, through to, as you said, doing a much more structured strategic exercise. I think it's really useful for two reasons. One is you get kind of like a bit of organisational muscle memory around how this stuff kind of works and how we're going to interact. And then the second bit is you also then flush out all those kind of problems. So again, that's how your plan works. Because, the old saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. That's, let's have that first contact in a managed, sensible environment. And Adam in our team, who heads up our technical incident response function, always says that you want to make as many decisions as you can when you're not under stress. And that is something that always, I think is a really, really good idea, because that safe environment where you can think of these things through, well, would we do X or would we do Y? What would the implications of that be? Okay, if we were to give our customers that message, how would they react? Would we be comfortable with that message? How do we communicate? Oh, well, actually, which of our suppliers do we need to notify? You want to be working all that stuff out in a nice, safe space. You don't want to be doing it when it really happens. And so, I totally agree. Exercising tabletops, however you want to structure it, at whatever level and whatever level of complexity, absolutely recommend it, because it is training. You are, training hard so the incident is easy. Yeah, totally.
Do you also think it engages the C-suite as well, who don't commonly get involved in that kind of thing on a day-to-day? I mean, they're used to dealing with incidents, let's face it. If you're sitting at that level, you've probably dealt with more than a few in your time, but they're different from what we're talking about. We're not talking about sort of like you haven't paid your tax bill and you've got to find a billion quid. Well, if you owe taxman £1 billion, I think you've got other problems. But, do you think, it opens up the eyes of that C-suite and say, look, you've got to be ready for an incident. This is stuff you've got to prep for. So you've got to be part of the team. And can we, as InfoSec people, actually call upon you in the event of a serious incident whereby you're not going to sort of panic and run around with you waving your arms above your head, screaming, why are they doing it? But actually being involved and actually helping us resolve the issue. Is there value in that?
Yeah, no, I think there is totally, for two reasons. One is that it is an excellent place to showcase the value that cybersecurity as a function, discipline, or profession adds. So put it this way, if you think about kind of like making the business case for security, that is a great way to do it. It brings it to life. It helps people visualize and feel something that's ultimately intangible, which I think is fantastic. So it has that benefit if you look at it from the kind of the CISO's perspective. But then if you look at it from the exec perspective, again, I think if anything, it gives people assurance. It gives people actually assurance that, well, okay, we have thought about this. You have got that. Okay, now I do understand who I can call and why you can. So I think both sides get something out of it. And you're right, as an awareness raising exercise for senior busy people, if you can do that in a suited, managed way, I think it is much better than sending them on a 15-minute click next course.
Yeah. Those situations where they are serious and it's business critical, that demands then as we've said, several functions coming together, be it at that C-suite and making big decisions. Now, the implications and the options then that start to come out of those, that's the wargaming that really needs to take place to understand, if I go down this route, it's going to open up these options, or it's actually going to close down certain other ones. On the notification side, as you were saying earlier, Joe, these are the things that really do need to be played out. We will always advocate around the threat intelligence. Again, on the playbook side, if you can put together the most likely scenarios rather than trying to boil the ocean, and again, undertake some of those tabletop exercises around perhaps just maybe a few, just one or two or three of those key ones, you're on the front foot straight away. That group are at least familiar with that territory. And indeed, what's likely to happen then. But bringing together HR with finance, with operations, those departments that, again, would absolutely be involved. Again, big incidents, potentially multinational, where it's, again, crossing different jurisdictions. Joe's seen a few of those. It becomes very complicated emotionally, and again with different agendas. Sometimes it's bringing that together within that environment. It's a fast-paced and highly charged, I think the word is.
It's fun. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I think this has been a fantastic podcast, and I think it's valuable information and it's valuable to speak to people such as yourselves that deal with this kind of thing on a regular basis, because most of us InfoSec people, hopefully, if we're doing things right, you might experience this maybe once or twice in your career. But hearing it from yourselves is really valuable, because I think what it does is it allows us as InfoSec professionals to think, oh, right, it's not all on my back. There are people I can go and talk to. And I now have a couple of ideas that I can go back to my BCP, DR and start thinking, well, actually, shall we start running, incidents? Shall we get some awareness? And I love what you said, actually, both of you, actually, about it being awareness for the C-suite, that they do have support under them. They don't have to make snap decisions, because I'm guessing that's part of the problem as well. Somebody at the top makes a snap decision without talking to anybody below, or without being any realization that there's anybody below, because sometimes you don't. It's a bit easier now. I think I read in a Gartner report earlier this morning that 70% of large organizations now have a CISO who either advises the board or is part of the board, and it's becoming increasingly more important. And I support that for obvious reasons. A, I've been a CISO in my career, and B, how can you secure an environment when you're reporting 4 levels below? And God forbid if you have an incident, because all of a sudden you've got all these gatekeepers who are, I've got to speak to somebody who can make a decision, thanks, So fantastic to speak to you guys, and no doubt we'll probably revisit this at various different times. I think this is such a big subject matter with so many components. I think it would be great to explore a bit more down the line.
Thank you, James. Appreciate you having us on.
Thank you, James. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Fantastic, and thank you, both of you. And to all of you out there, thank you ever so much for listening to this podcast. Please feel free to subscribe. Come and join us on our YouTube channel. We're just tickling sort of like the 5K subscribers at the moment. We'd love to get that over the line. Have a great day. And if you need any help, you know where to call.